Prepare to fire. We've got human Cannonball on this Atari archive. While so many home games of the late 1970s seem like perfunctory takes on arcade games or real-world activities, sometimes they get really strange. Such as today's game, Human Cannonball. As the name suggests, Human Cannonball is a game where you're firing a person out of a cannon and trying to hit a target. In this case, a basket-shaped water tower, to score points. Much like last episode's game, Canyon Bomber, this carnival-esque concept is complicated by physics. Yes, Human Cannonball is essentially a one-player artillery game. Depending on the game type, you're adjusting the cannon's angle, the amount of power behind the shot, and location, all in service of nailing the target while also accounting for distance. For the unfamiliar, artillery games have a long history dating back to at least some point between 1969 and 1974, when a professor at Dartmouth named Arthur Luhrmann programmed a graphical artillery game called Potshot on the Dartmouth time-sharing system, reportedly for his students. While Potshot doesn't appear to still exist, a similar conversion was done for the CompuColor 2 computer in 1977 called Shoot. In both cases, players are set on either side of a mountain. They can choose where they want their gun encampments and how high the mountain should be, and then they will take turns setting their angles and power trying to hit each other. It's unknown if Potshot was based on an earlier artillery game, but the genre was further popularized by David All's 1973 book, 101 Basic Computer Games, with a single-player, text-based version that was widely ported to a variety of computer platforms. This single-player version involves firing to hit a target within a set number of turns, making it a likely starting point for Human Cannonball. This VCS title may also be related to a game idea mentioned in an internal Atari memo dated January 14th, 1975, currently held by the Strong Museum of Play. This game, Cannonball, would involve firing a daredevil out of a cannon to hit a target, with the player controlling the amount of powder. Each successful hit would move the target back, an unsuccessful shot would cause a splat sound effect and animation. The game came back around in a May 21st, 1976 memo about game ideas, and this time was picked up by Owen Rubin as his first game. While the prototype ROM is online, the game ultimately went unreleased. The author of the VCS Human Cannonball is unknown at the time of this video, but Rubin has noted online that the game is similar to what he came up with for the arcade. If there is such a link, it makes sense why Atari dropped the Cannonball arcade idea. To reiterate, it is a really weird game, and I can't imagine fine-tuning your shots would really work well in an arcade setting. There are several variables at play in this game that change based on which one of the 8 game types is chosen. Some game types set a fixed position for the cannon and/or the water tower, while others allow one or both to be moved. Some give you a fixed angle or speed, measured in miles per hour, while others allow you to adjust one or both of these between 20 and 80 degrees and 0 to 45 miles per hour, respectively. Finally, 4 of the game types introduce a moving window that players must time their shots to pass through to the target. Difficulty switches adjust the width of the water tower, which functionally gives you more of a margin of error for your shots. All of these game types are playable with 1 or 2 players. In a 1-player game, you want to try and make 7 successful shots before missing the target 7 times. With the 2-player game, it's simply a race to 7 points. If one player reaches that score, the other is given 1 more turn to try and tie the game. At first appearance, it might seem difficult to actually hit the water tower, but as you get a feel for the angles and the power of the shots, it becomes easier to catch your human bullet. A whiffed shot gets you a little animation of your person falling to the ground and somehow still being with it enough to utter ouch. Credit to the sprite work. A bad shot does look like it hurts. With a successful shot, you also get a little triumphant person popping up in the tower, arms wide as if to say, "Look, I'm somehow alive!" The visuals in the game are practically centered on the human sprite as they are launched out of the cannon and pray for a safe landing, so these little charming details go a long way. And from personal experience, just remember that you can move the water tower in half the games, or you'll really be struggling to get it. The game doesn't have any visual indication that this is something you can do, and given that it's uncommon for an artillery game to allow you to shift the target's position around, it's easy to not even think to try. Unsurprisingly for an Atari game of this vintage, Human Cannonball is at its best with 2 players. That said, I'm not sure there's enough to this game for it to rise above it making an occasional appearance in your system or emulator of choice. It's a lot of fun for what it is, and making improbable shots work by moving the basket is always a trip. But it doesn't take long for players to figure out how to nail shots consistently. The moving window requires you to properly time your shots or fire over the thing entirely, but with how readily your Daredevil gets knocked back for even brushing against the barrier, it almost feels like an overcorrection of how easy the game types without it can get. And somewhat surprisingly, there's no game type with a stationary window to emulate what Ruben did with his arcade game to try and split the difference. I also can't help but feel like the game loses something by virtue of being a target-based artillery game. Unlike Shoot or subsequent 2-player versus games like Artillery Duel or Worms, the lack of direct 2-player competition takes some of the tension out of your shots. At that point, it just comes down to how much you personally enjoy this specific kind of trajectory game. I could say the same about single-player modes too. Having a specific goal target that you either make or fail at only has so much life in it unless this genre is your jam. Again, it's not a bad game by any means, just a bit thin. Even if this isn't everyone's cup of tea, it seems that Human Cannonball was a game that Atari continued to sell and advertise from its March 1979 release into the 1980s. There is evidence to suggest that it might have fallen off pretty quickly, however. Advertisements see the game being sold from around $20 in 1981 to being marked down to around the $10 range the following year, with some other also-ran games from the 1970s like Home Run and Flag Capture. Like many other VCS games, it was being cleared out for around $5 by late 1983. The Sears version, Cannon Man, is rather rare, only showing up in advertising that I've found from 1979 through 1981, and today a boxed copy can sell for hundreds of dollars if you can find it. There is more solid sales evidence too. Atari Corporation reportedly sold 666 units of the game in 1987, with 24 of those returned over the following 2 years. So not a terribly popular game, even if it was readily available during the system's peak years. For better or worse, unlike the other 1979 releases like Canyon Bomber or the similarly Daredevil-themed game Skydiver, which was also based on an arcade game by Ruben, Human Cannonball's 2-player matches take longer to go through, which is unusual given how many of the VCS's games are built to the system's fast-paced strengths. Not that there's anything wrong with being a bit more deliberate, but in an era where most well-remembered and returned-to games on the platform tend to be speedy, it's a weird one to recommend. Still, I enjoy it for what it is. While it's not the best artillery game on the VCS, it only takes a shot or two before you can figure out what you're doing. And until that moment hits you, there's always something a little bit comical about seeing your Daredevil whiff their shot. Next time, the VCS is running for a first down.